Hello there, and welcome back to this Damnful Idealistic Crusade. This particular video is one that I always wanted to do, but never thought I would get the chance to. I've actually had the particular disc that we're going to be going over in this video for quite some time, but it's taken a while to go through each and every one with a fine-tooth comb and really compare them to their US counterparts. So this video will be detailing the Japanese Letterbox series release for the James Bond series, running from Dr. No through to Tomorrow Never Dies, plus a mystery title. This is something, again, I always wanted to do because you always hear rumors that these are supposedly better than their US counterparts since they were all pressed in 1993 and all feature really stunning art, which I will give you an example of here with the release of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So as you can see, these all utilize original poster art. They all have their original obi strips, which look fantastic. And these were the primary letterbox release for the Bond films in Japan. So they actually had to wait a little bit longer than we did here in the US. Our letterbox titles started coming out in 1989 and ran through 93, 94, where all of theirs came out in this matching series in 1993. Previous to this, you had the evergreen releases and the original releases, some of which were under Warner Home Video, all of which were pan and scan. So these added digital sound and this wonderful artwork design that carries over for all of the original 16 films. But of course, we also delved into the 1990s and the Brosnan era. So here we have the Japanese release of Goldeneye. So I was able to complete the entire run up through Tomorrow Never Dies. So this actually brings me full circle to the one Laserdisc that always eludes me. It's kind of become a running joke with anyone who knows me or knows my hunt for it or my Bond fandom or knows this channel that I'm always after the Japanese The World Is Not Enough release, which was exclusive to Japan and extremely rare and still goes for quite a substantial sum online. But if you've seen my earlier videos, I did get a chance to review a copy. Thankfully, somebody loaned me one so I could do a channel review and also take a look at one or two of these other Japanese discs. So now that I've been able to actually obtain the rest of them, it became an active pursuit of mine to try and catalog any difference I could possibly find. So I actually use these for my regular yearly rewatch, which I do every November around Thanksgiving time. That got instilled in me by all the years of the TBS Thanksgiving Bond marathons. So it doesn't seem like Thanksgiving season without doing the yearly James Bond rewatch. In addition to looking for transfer differences by doing still frame comparisons and comparing directly to the US counterparts and DVDs and Blu-rays like I always do anyway. I also use these for my yearly rewatch. So I watched all of them in consecutive chronological order like I do every year. And so that way I could actually see each and every transfer in action with their soundtracks to really get a direct comparison, but actually in motion, because it is very important to look at film transfers on disc, even going back to Laserdisc and standard def. It's very important to not just look at still frames and screen captures and things like that, but also to compare things in motion. And it was really surprising because I think it really helped me to sort of disprove some of the mythology that goes around with Japanese printings, which is very similar in a lot of ways to what I've found and what I'm sure a lot of people are aware of if you're into record collecting. With the in the music world, a lot of audiophiles and record collectors have a great fascination and fondness for Japanese pressings that isn't always validated outside of the cleanliness of the final pressing itself. So there's a lot of factors to deal with. You have, of course, hard-coded Japanese subtitles to deal with, so you have to worry about will it infringe on the picture, especially if you have to zoom in on a Laserdisc image in your individual setup in your own home theater. But also, are the soundtracks going to be any different? Do you have to worry about the IRE brightness level differences, so on and so forth? So there's a lot of things to go through. So this video will be definitely a little bit on the long side, but of course, we are talking about, almost 20 films and their Japanese counterparts compared to their earlier Japanese counterparts and their US counterparts and various reprintings and things. And also, I'm going to go over all of the wonderful gatefolds and the art and the disc labels, and even one or two surprising variations I found, because this lot did have a few duplicates in it. But this is the complete Japanese letterbox run, and again, something I never thought I would ever be able to do. So without further ado, let's go off to the table and enjoy the magic of Commander Bond in Japan. You've never been to Japan before? No, never. Once when I was with him in Tokyo, we had a rather interesting experience. So we're going to start it all off with the Japanese letterbox release of Dr. No. And as you can see, they definitely came up with their own design style. They do beautifully use original poster art, in this case, Japanese poster art. They have a wonderful yellow matching obi strip that will run through the entire letterbox run of these, which really got started and ran through 1993. So that's led a lot of people to think the Japanese letterbox Bond titles on disc are, superior pressings because they're a bit newer, whereas in the US, our letterbox series really started in 1989 and ran through 1992, and then the last two discs came out in 1993, 94, which would be Man with the Golden Gun and License to Kill. They had updated cover styles that were only used on those two discs, and whereas the others are in the traditional white cover with the Bond logo and the MGM gold letterbox banner on the top. Now, I've always wondered if this whole notion of Japanese LDs, and particularly the Japanese Bond LDs, are better, because the few people who seem to have them always seem to indicate they are better or somehow superior in picture quality. But from my experience, Japanese LD pressings, it's kind of very much similar to my experience with Japanese record pressings. And you hear so many people talk about the great positives about Japanese record pressings and how they're the vinyl is almost always dead quiet, but there can be significant mastering differences. And so you get all these benefits on one side, but then the actual material pressed on the actual disc itself is either the same or not worth the effort of tracking down a Japanese import, or in some cases in record collecting, actually inferior to an original UK or US pressing of whatever particular album you're looking at. So as with anything, it really varies, and until you can really sit down with the two different identical copies side by side and compare the US and the Japanese or the UK or whatever you're looking at, you're not really going to know unless you get firsthand experience and are able to make up your own opinions. So getting this opportunity to look at these was really something, and that's why I wanted to go through them with a fine-tooth comb before I made a video about them. So they went for this design with original Japanese poster art, and unfortunately, they centered it and then used this very simplistic white background with James Bond's secret agent 007 in this text here in the background, and that'll be used in various places on these jackets as a sort of background motif. You get used to it. It's a bit weird looking at it at first, and again, one would wish they had just used the entire poster art as the jacket, which they did randomly do a few times, and we'll get to some of those. So there is a consistency in the overall design and the gatefolds, which are on obviously the longer films. Dr. No being a single disc, it doesn't get a gatefold. You get the matching obies, which this is really one of the cases where I think it is really cool and helpful to have the obi strips, because they all match and they all have this yellow design. But outside of that, it definitely takes some getting used to, this sort of plain background. But, you do get the original main cast and crew listing here in the credits, and I have always appreciated they did try to use some form of the original title font for the film. Go ahead and slip the obi strip off so you can see the cover without it. And again, there is something to the whole, it's a very plain white background with a lot of space, and that does grab the eye. You have the MGM UA logo tucked in up here. Here's the obi in focus, and I will flip it over. And this is the main reason why it's cool to have all the obies for the first 16, because they all have this matching use of the gun barrel on the rear, and they'll also mention the other titles, or at least some of them. They're not listed in chronological order. At least I'm not sure. My my Japanese has not existed. But if you look very closely, this is actually the same version of the gun barrel that EMI was using on their CD reprintings in the early 1990s, and well, I should say late 80s through early 90s. So if you have any of those first James Bond soundtrack CDs before, long before the 2003 expanded remasters, which actually I had a few of them growing up, you would be very familiar with this particular version of the gun barrel, which seems like a stylized version of one of Roger Moore's gun barrel poses. But I enjoyed how I can recognize the same gun barrel EMI was using around this time period. So here's the rear cover, and this sets the design template for all of the rear covers of this particular series of discs. They all use gun barrel imagery, and this will be used in the titles with gatefolds as their gatefolds in a very impressive way. You get a selection of original stills, and they are copied from original stills, so there is some color fluctuation, and they look very much like the original lobby cards or production stills. And I always enjoy those when they're copied over without being airbrushed or touched up or things, because it definitely gives the vintage feel of the film's original release. You get the traditional Japanese box style design here, which gives you all of your important tech specs. And as always on Japanese discs, they were very nice to actually put the relevant information in English. So it does indicate it's CLB, that it is monaural, it's PCM digital audio. It has the Laserdisc graphics, should you choose to use those, and it is closed captioned. Of course, everything else is in Japanese, but I always enjoy how they put all the information at the bottom. It's very clear and easy to read. You can see the runtime, because on most Laserdisc jackets, you're having to look everywhere and be like, wait, so where is this? What audio does it have? And the information's all over the place, whereas in Japan, they were, put it all in the bottom in these nicely organized boxes. And they're friendly enough to English-speaking audiences who do not speak Japanese, so you can get the relevant information out. So, of course, these being Japanese discs, they are hard-coded with their Japanese subtitles. But, very thankfully, if you're dealing with trying to reframe or zoom in on Laserdisc picture on a more modern display, they never really intrude into the picture on the scope films. It's these original titles, the original three, Dr. No, For Much With Love, Goldfinger, that are, somewhere around the 1.66 ratio. On LD, they're a bit opened up to more like a 1.55. That's where the subtitles are going to be in the picture. It's not horrible, but you will have to keep that in mind if you are a person that has to zoom in on a Laserdisc picture. So on these three, and then of course Live and Let Die, Man with the Golden Gun at 185, will also have the subtitles kind of come into the picture. But it's not horrible, and if you've ever seen a Japanese LD before, you should be pretty well used to the idea of hard-coded subtitles on a Laserdisc. So these actually all include their original Laserdisc graphics inserts. So this is a full piece of cardstock paper that is giving you the basic idea of how to engage and utilize Laserdisc graphics and what they will look like inside the picture. So here you have these cartoon figure frames where it is already showing the hard-coded subtitles, and then with Laserdisc graphics, the ability to engage, say for example, English dialogue subtitles in English, you would be able to do so, and it would look something like this eventually. Of course, the instructions are in Japanese, but it's cool that this is still in here, and so the package is technically complete. And then it's got a little mail-away card, I believe. And I believe this is just the traditional questionnaire we're all used to, and we all wonder if we would ever get a response if we just dropped it in a mail. So I guess this is the Japanese equivalent of that. I'm not going to show this for every disc to come because it's the same insert in all of them, but it's just I wanted to at least show it on the first disc just so you get an idea of what actually comes in these packages. They don't have full-on booklets or anything because these are just standard movie releases for the time. They're not special editions or box sets, but I did want to at least show it one time. So just keep in mind, this is present in every single jacket of all the other Bonds. And then what's really cool is they kept the same yellow gun barrel and used it for all of the labels. So they each have the classic gun barrel and a version of the title font, of course, in Japanese, but it's nice to see some sort of custom label work. And you still have MGM on the logo there, but it gives them a little bit more of an identity than what we got here in the States, which were just, the standard MGM UA label. And eventually, we got the Goldfinger Thunderball box sets with the amazing gun barrel logo that has the blood dripping down over the CAV sides as the film progresses and into the special features. But this is something nice, and again, something that helps make the Japanese version stick out a bit more in addition to their impressive cover art. But these are the same on every single one. It's just going to be that the title of the film changes over the actual labels, but the actual background and the layout of the labels remains the same on all of these. I'll also show you the nice original plastic cover they come in. This is the traditional Japanese style sleeve that has the little perforated opening, and it has the original Laserdisc graphics sticker still on here, which I've always liked because it seems to indicate a Cinerama curve type screen for the orange here. As you can see, it almost has the look of what's called smile boxing, which was the video form developed to try and simulate curved screen Cinerama. So you can see the top and bottom kind of run inwards to give that sort of curved screen effect, but it's just a really cool looking logo, and it was really cool that all of these had the original Japanese jackets, which help really protect the disc very well. They're not the cheap, super flimsy jackets you see as record sleeves these days, but they have a little bit more of a thickness to them. It's gotten a little bit of like dirt and stuff over the years, so that's why when you see some of these on eBay, if they're still in these jackets, or you see pictures online, it's not the actual jacket that looks dirty, but this kind of reflects and picks up light and stuff. So that's why I went ahead and slipped it off before talking about this disc. But I figured, like the insert, I would show this once so you would get an idea of what the jacket and the cool LDG sticker looked like. And again, it was really amazing. All of these had their OB strips. All of them have the LDG insert, and they all have the jackets with the LDG sticker on them as well. And now we get to the point at which we talk about why everybody's here and why I always wanted to look at these, and that's the transfer. So, for years I had heard and seen various forum posts on the LDDB and Facebook posts and different things with everybody saying that the Japanese versions were either a little bit better than the US versions or significantly better on certain titles. And again, it's very rare to get even just a couple of these in a very expensive prospect for somebody here in the US, particularly trying to import them. So I never thought I'd get the chance to actually review the entire series for myself to really see if this myth of the Japanese versions being significantly better was, really worth anything. So I was very surprised. I went through, on a film-by-film basis, and I used these to do my traditional yearly rewatch of the series, so I could actually view every single Japanese disc, start to finish, all the way through, and while doing my usual rewatch, look for any potential differences or improvements in transfer or sound. So what I've actually found is these are seemingly pretty much exact duplicates of the main 1989 white cover US Letterbox series, with one or two exceptions where some improvements were made. They are pretty much exactly what we got on the standard US Letterbox releases. So this disc right here is exactly the same source and the same master as what showed up on the Connery Collection box set, and then eventually the standalone Dr. No with the poster art in '94, which was just the same disc and a regular jacket. So it's a single CLV disc. Again, kind of more generously framed at more like a 1.55 instead of the 1.66. So you get a little bit more on top and bottom on the Letterbox Laserdisc than you do on the DVD and Blu-ray. But it's exactly the same. There is no real difference. Pretty much the side break is at the same point. It's the same source for the mono track, which is PCM encoded. So really, in this film's instance, the Japanese pressing, all it gets you is a fancier cover and hard-coded Japanese subtitles. Other than that, it's the exact same disc and the same transfer, and there's no difference in really in pressing quality causing any difference. The video is the same, the audio is the same. You just get the fancier jacket, and since it's Japanese, the actual card stock is a lot thicker. It's much sturdier and definitely feels more premium. So again, you're getting the nice accoutrements of the original poster art, the nice Obi strip, the custom disc label, the really nice rear jacket design that matches all the others. But on this one, and what's actually pretty much the case for most of these, it's not really any different from the US release. So that was a bit of a surprise. I'd always been led to believe that, the Japanese discs were either a little bit better or significantly better. And as soon as I found this with Dr. No, I'm like, well, that's a bit of a surprise. So, and it seems to be generally the rule for the rest of these. Give you a shot of what it looks like with the jacket back on, with the graphic sticker in the right place. And of course, when I first got these, they were done the other way, so I was like, why is the sticker upside down? But they are designed to be used with the opening on the side, so that's why the graphic sticker slots in right here underneath the MGM UA logo. So here we go with From Russia with Love. It's the same exact scenario as Dr. No. This pretty much replicates exactly what we got on the Connery Collection box set here in the States, and then that was eventually reissued as a standalone disc with the same transfer. So pretty much exactly the same here. Again, a bit more open at like a 1.55 instead of the usual 1.66. Still the same excellent transfer, and definitely I'd say probably the best looking version on LD is one of these. But it looks exactly the same as the US versions. There's no uptick in picture quality. The same PCM mono from the same source that sounds a bit better than what the older releases in the Criterion had. And again, this was a title that MGM really either they did a new scan or they used a cleaner source than what the older discs and what Criterion had access to. So I already think the US Connery Collection disc is better looking than the Criterion, even though it's only CLV. This one just basically gives you that with Japanese subtitles and the fancier cover and label. So again, you have a Japanese poster here, which uses the same image that was used on some posters, but primarily on the soundtrack releases on the original LP. Here's the Obi strip in focus, and then the same matching rear, and this is the same on all of them. The only difference I've found on the Obi strips is apparently they did do a second printing on later titles, or they just updated the Obi strip. So on some, I'll show you the top 007 logos a little bit different. And I had to ask around. Sam Hatch from the Culture Dog channel, who is the other major Bond LD collector who has all these Japanese discs as well, was helpful enough to kind of clue me into the difference in Obis being maybe more of a changing the hype sticker a little bit and updating them a tiny bit, but the actual discs and jackets and everything are the same for the most part. There is one exception that I'll show a printing difference when we get to it, but that's why on some of the Obis they have a black top on the rear with a slightly different and revised 007 logo. Again, same design for the rear. Really nice that it matches. It looks great on a black background. Lovely choice of stills. You have the classic gun barrel here. Again, trying to get much more of a period correct font for the title, which I always really appreciate. It looks beautiful. But again, this is pretty much the US disc with Japanese subtitles. It's a single CLV disc. Same place pretty much for the breakpoint. No real extras, no obviously no second disc, so no gatefold, but just beautiful jacket. Again, the nice thicker cardstock style. You get the custom gun barrel logo with the yellow gun barrel. So again, this is pretty much just a Japanese version of what we already got in the US. So here we go with Goldfinger, and this is one of the jackets where they just said, forget our design, and they used a version of the original UK quad sheet with the projection of Bond and Pussy on the Golden Girl, which of course was Margaret Nolan in the original title sequence. They did use this in Japan, so you get the Japanese information here, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. I mean, just what is there to say? It's just a beautiful jacket, and honestly, the black background is a lot more eye-catching and impressive than even the white background. So as they did on the backs of Golden Gun and License to Kill, the last of the US letterbox jackets, those rear covers on black look really impressive, just like the rear covers of these Japanese discs on a black background look really impressive. So I wish some of the other jackets were definitely as impressive as this, using the whole space for original art. Gorgeous, gorgeous jacket. I mean, just what is there to say? Using original poster art is always the way to go, but this just looks beautiful. You slip the obi off so you can get the full impact. And you can see they did give a hint of the sort of secret agent lettering here on the side, which, I mean, that ties it into the other discs, but I wish they hadn't bothered with it because it would look, even better without that. But at least it's minor. But, at first it doesn't even look like letters. It looks like the side of the jacket is faded somehow. But no, that's that secret agent 007 lettering there. Here's the obi strip. And again, same exact type of strip. So they didn't change that. Again, it's just a single CLV disc, so no gatefold. But again, you get the really nice thick cardstock, so it stayed super minty all this time. The matching rear to go with the first two, all your relevant information at the bottom, usage of the gun barrel, and original title font text. Just lovely looking jacket. But again, I will tell you, this is the exact same thing as we got in the Connery Collection box set. So it's the same transfer of Goldfinger, again about 1.55 with PCM mono, but it does have the title song replaced in stereo. That's what MGM did on that release and the Goldfinger box set. So if you want the title song in proper mono, you will have to get the Criterion, or you'll have to get the older MGM open mat or 133 releases. They did finally restore the mono mix with the mono title song around the time of the Ultimate Edition DVD, and you can get that on the US Blu-ray as well. But MGM would do that where they would, slip in a stereo version of the main title theme or song on Laserdisc for a while, because they found the stereo master source. So it was sort of a, hey, this is cool for audiophiles, but for historical accuracy, not so much. But yeah, this is the exact same transfer and disc as what we got in the Connery Collection box set and the slightly later standalone repressing. So they did take this transfer and clean it up for the CAV box set and redid the color timing and made it full CAV and made it really sparkle. But this is still a solid way to watch the film. It's maybe it doesn't have that color saturation of the THX CAV box set, so it's a little bit lighter. It's a bit contrastier, but it's still perfectly serviceable and looks great. Sounds excellent, but again, you will have to keep in mind they did replace the title song and change it to a stereo master source. And this is the one instance where the Criterion CAV version has a really significant and different print source and transfer used. So Goldfinger is probably the most important Criterion to own from a picture quality standpoint, because it is a completely different element they used. And so it has a very different look to it, especially in the color timing. It even has print changeover cues, so apparently they used a print for that, whereas this may have used some sort of interpositive that had been generated. So again, unfortunately, there's nothing special about this Japanese copy outside of the fancy packaging and the gorgeous art and the custom label and stuff. So, of course, we move next to Thunderball, which, being the first Bond over 2 hours in length, means it's 2 discs with a nice gatefold. And judging by the cover, we're going back to the design of the first 2 discs with the Secret Agent 007 and the white background. But when you look at the art and you see they utilized the amazing Frank McCarthy art, which was only ever partially used. It was never, this whole quad design was never used on an original poster. They just used some of the elements, particularly his rendering of Bond in the Bell Textron rocket belt. So they did use this for the 30th anniversary of the film and the 1995 THX CAV remastered box set. So when you see this, you immediately think of that release and think, oh, this must be a version of that in CLV. No, this is actually the version prior. So this is using that art for the first time on a jacket, but it is still a version of the film pre-box set. So that means the PCM is actually a version of the mono mix, which we first got on that 1989 Letterbox US release. And then that also turned up in the Connery Collection Volume 2 box set. So again, this is not from the THX CAV box set that spiffed that transfer up and made a stereo Dolby Surround encoded remix of the film with an alternate audio source. So that has the different dialogue appearing for the first time and some different music cues. And again, the whole John Barry score is replaced with stereo music stems. And it's a fine remix for what it does, but I really prefer this mono because that is much more historically accurate. It is the mix the film had on theatrical release. But it does seem like the differences in audio in terms of the different dialogue and different music cues and different ending music cues even were a actual product of the original release, and seemingly the best indicator I've ever gotten is perhaps maybe the differences were there was a U.S. mono and a U.K. mono mix. The U.S. release being, definitely several months later because films were released over time worldwide back in the 60s. So I'm thinking it's definitely maybe one is a UK source, one is a US source. So then ever since, the mono mix has been one way on disc, and then the versions of the stereo remix have that alternate audio base with the different dialogue and such. So here's the jacket. Again, nice obi strip. Same style rear on the obi. And you get the full width of the just fantastic art. I mean, this is just incredible. It belongs in a museum, literally. I would love to see this actual painting, the real original painting at some point in my life. This has become my favorite imagery for all of Thunderball. And again, it's just astonishing they didn't use this for the original campaign, which already had fantastic art. Again, they used sections of it, but I can't believe they didn't use this entire piece. But again, when you have Frank McCarthy and Robert McGuinness together doing the art for your film campaign, I mean, you can't possibly go wrong. Two of the great poster artists of all time. So again, this does have a gatefold. So this is the first in the series, and they all use this gun barrel motif with the original title font. Looks really impressive. But if this seems a little bit familiar, that would be because they pretty much took this from the 1992 VHS run that's known as the Remastered Collector's Edition run, where all the spines were this same blue-tinted gun barrel logo with the title font on the side. And those were the ones that when they were originally released, they had the little, the VHS jackets themselves had the little flip tab, so they had a gatefold on the front of the cover with a little bit of text and some imagery, and eventually they dropped those, so usually you just find the jackets without the little gatefold cover. But if this looked familiar, that's why. So they took that from the 1992 US remastered VHS run. And then here on the panel, because this doesn't run the whole side, they have included the original tri-panel door poster for theaters that took the main three panels from the regular US one sheet with the classic look up, look down, look out with the 007 logo worked in, which was part of the original, it was really the main part of the campaign in terms of the tagline. And so taking three different images from the two artists. So it's really cool. They sort of recreate the original one sheet poster on the side of the gatefold. And of course, it's black and white, but it looks really nice on this jacket. So here's the rear cover. Again, exactly matching the earlier disc with the same motif and design, gun barrel on the top, nice selection of stills, and indicating this is a CLV title, letterbox, because it's scope, so it's letterbox 235, and includes the monomix SPCM. And of course, you do get your hard-coded Japanese subtitles, but because it's scope, they are in the bottom letterboxing area. So if you have to zoom in on the picture on your display, all the scope titles zoom in perfectly, the equivalent of their US versions, and you don't really have to worry about the subtitles. And if you really don't want to see them, you can mask out the bottom if you want to, and they disappear perfectly. They don't really intrude into the picture. Get maybe a trace of the top of a letter once or twice, but for the most part, from this point onward, all of them, that's not really an issue. So if you're interested in these and you are a person who has to zoom in on picture on your display device or whatever your setup is, you'll be pretty safe and not have to worry about the subtitles intruding on the picture. They stay in the bottom very well, and the image isn't shifted up or anything. So I did my usual setup and just masked out the bit of letterboxing that still showed up. So I was just covering up the subtitles, and every once in a while you get like a little stray top of a letter at the bottom of the frame, but it was not really an issue. Some Japanese discs or some subtitled discs, you'll see it, and they just didn't worry about it, and the letters are all in the bottom of the frame. So thankfully that's not an issue here. What was really interesting and what really sets a precedent for these Japanese discs, again, this is a 2-disc release and it is CLV, but it was a general practice on LD, even for films just over 2 hours, to include the third side with CAV encoding. So you get the action climax of the film in the superior CAV format, and you will then be able to, step through frame by frame if you wish, or but you do get that slight uptick in quality because it is CAV on the final side. For some unknown reason, why I do not know, this disc and every other Japanese disc that is more than one disc in these Japanese Bond letterbox releases skips that. So this is 3-sided CLV, and no disc in this letterbox series has a side 3 CAV final side. That was a major disappointment for me because I really enjoy getting that slight. It's very slight. Usually it doesn't make much of a difference, but when you become a custom LD, you can tell the difference between CAV and CLV, and I like the ability of being able to still step through Bond films with full CAV, and I like how US Laserdisc releases will do that, how studios were nice enough most of the time to give you that benefit. They have to break it on a third side. Well, let's go ahead and put the last 20 minutes on side 3 and we'll give it to you in CAV to just a nice thing, instead of just having literally the last 5 minutes of the movie on side 3 in CLV, and you got to get up, switch disc just for that last 5 minutes or the end credits. So unfortunately, that's, for me, one of the major drawbacks of these Japanese versions is you lose all the CAV sides. But what's really interesting about this, again, it's the same exact US master as the letterbox version, but with Thunderball, there's a key difference. The 1989 original disc has a flub in it. When Bond and Domino are at the casino and they are at the table and Bond is ordering, the Dom Perignon 55, there's a slight stutter in the US disc that makes Bond literally stutter when he's ordering. So it's like, Dom Perignon, and it makes him stutter. And I thought it was just my disc for the longest time, until finally I was able to ask around and other people checked theirs and had the same issue. So then I realized, no, it was something that happened in the transfer process. Otherwise, that disc is great for the time. Really nice color, original mono mix, and it's just that one little hiccup there. It's very, very faint, and you blink and you miss it. But it's one of those quirks that you tie to a specific disc because it's just baked in there. They did correct this on the printing for the Connery Collection Volume 2 box set. So if you want the film on LD with the mono mix, but without that little hiccup flub, you have to get the Connery Collection Volume 2 box. This LD uses that same master, but it actually still has that hiccup in there. So this is literally the original 89 US letterbox master. And the Japanese printing, so it's exactly the same. I wasn't expecting that at all. I figured this being 93, it would be we have the correction from the Connery box set, but it actually does not. So that little Dom Perignon hiccup has made it all the way over here, which I found very amusing because that's one of those things in LD I immediately think of because I've just watched that disc so many times. I've just gotten used to that flub, that transfer hiccup being baked in there. So I will say, even though it doesn't have that CAV side on the scope bonds, particularly the ones that were printed earlier in 1989, 1990 or so, it seems like they may be a tad bit sharper on these Japanese discs. And when I say a tad, I mean just barely. I did do a lot of back and forth comparisons. They are the exact same masters. They almost have the exact same breakpoints. They vary a little bit as most LD pressings would do, but they are pretty much the same. So it's not a quality uptick that's worth tracking down and paying the higher price for the Japanese versions. But it does seem to kind of be there, and I think because it is a later pressing from 93, that's probably the reason why. But it may be just my eyes playing tricks on me, because other than that, they appear very near identical. Maybe a tiny bit less video noise, because again, it's a Japanese 1993 pressing versus a US 1989 pressing. But outside of that, it is identical. It's the same master. It's the same source. It's got the same hiccup flaw in it. So I was really surprised, especially after hearing for years the Japanese versions are so much better or significantly different. No, it's literally the U.S. master, and I didn't think MGM would pay to retransfer these just for Japan. But you get the fancier presentation in the jacket. You get the nice gatefold, the thicker cardstock. Looks gorgeous. So if all that sounds appealing to you, then you might want to go ahead and pick up this Japanese disc. But it's sort of a wash for me, because I do miss having that side 3 CAV and getting the ending of Thunderball in full CAV, which does make a noticeable difference. So comparing the side 3 on here to the side 3 of the US one, it's like, no, one is CAV, one is not. So it's pretty much a wash between the two. They're pretty much neck and neck. But I was very surprised that even that hiccup flaw made it over. So this is pretty much that 89 disc, but the Japanese version. Here is the Japanese letterbox release of You Only Live Twice. Again, single disc CLV using the original Japanese one sheet with the matching obi strip. Again, same exact obi as before. And now you can see the jacket in its full glory. I do wish, again, they would have just used the poster art across the whole jacket, but at least it matches and it looks really nice. And it's on the really nice, thick, premium cardstock, too. The matching rear with the black background, the gun barrel, original title font, and vintage production stills. But it just so happens that for Yolt, I have the 92 VHS I was talking about, so I can show you where this design for the gun barrel originated. So here it is. It's a bit beat up. I've had this ever since I was a kid, but it's getting quite tricky to find these particular printings with the nice gatefold. They use the US one-sheet art here. And then here's what I meant by it literally does have a gatefold on it. Usually if you do find these, it's the more common variety that just drops this gatefold section. And pretty much these were new pan and scan jobs from the Laserdisc masters that MGM had made. So they were meant to replace the older VHS runs. But what they did do is, there it is right there. That's the origination of the blue tinted gun barrel with original title font, and then they carried it onto the rear. So if you've ever seen these, that's where this design motif came from. It's a little bit different, but that's where they got it from. And once again, I can tell you 100% for a fact this is literally a copy of the US disc. And that disc already is excellent. There's no issues with it whatsoever, really, for its time period. And it's one of the first Bond discs I ever got on the format. So I've watched it many, many times. And comparing it to this, it's the same master. It's got the same exact breakpoint. It's literally the same disc, just with Japanese subtitles added. There is no difference in picture. There's no difference in brightness level. It's the same PCM mono track. So really, you would be getting this just for the fancier cover and trying to complete the run of Japanese letterbox titles. No difference in picture quality whatsoever. It's literally exactly the same. The only difference would be being pressed a couple years later in Japan, but it really doesn't cause any difference in sharpness or perceived picture quality. Again, it all the scope titles maybe feel a teensy bit better because they're several years newer, but on this one I couldn't really detect any difference, not in color, not in sharpness, contrast, anything. It literally looks identical, again, just with subtitles on the bottom of the screen. Now we move on to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which of all the films really has the most varied release history, because even during its original theatrical runs, it was already being shortened because at the longest Bond film, at 142 minutes, it frequently turned up in versions that were missing certain sequences and really iconic, famous scenes. It could be, very much shortened down even to almost very close to 2 hours, so dropping about 20 minutes of material. So on video, it could really vary in terms of it might be missing a little piece here and there before they started doing proper letterbox transfers. So the US letterbox LD really was very important for a lot of reasons, because that was the first properly framed, fully uncut version of the film on disc anywhere, or tape. Eventually they made a VHS box set that was letterboxed in the UK and did it for the anniversary in the 90s. So they made more of a fanfare in the UK because that's primarily where the super short version showed up. But that had already premiered on the US Laserdisc before that. And then when the first DVD came out, they accidentally dropped a line or two, so it was back to having stuff missing again. But anyway, this Japanese disc is, again, pretty much porting that US master. It's the same source master, so it is fully uncut, properly letterboxed with PCM mono. But again, you do lose the finale in CAV. It is 3 sides CLV, start to finish. Other than that, it's pretty much identical to the US disc. Again, being one of the scope bonds and being pressed a couple years down the road, it's maybe a hair sharper in a place or two. It has a slightly cleaner look to it. But again, I really hate losing that side 3 CAV. Again, it's the same obi strip design, but on the rear, as you can see, they've slightly altered it. So this is the second printing style of the obi strips that you'll see on these. So I don't know if they did both on all of them, but again, it just seems they slightly tweaked it on particularly the later discs. So the top has this black corner with the 007 logo, and they've just changed the information instead of just listing out various titles. So the jacket, once again, uses original art, but here they've gone for the whole jacket, used elements of the original US and UK one sheet, but then have the Secret Agent 007 here in a colored box. I don't know what they were doing with that. And then use the cast and crew information here with vintage font and the Japanese title. So it's a nice, striking jacket, but I don't know why they've got all this stuff going on. I'm happy they used the whole jacket this time and used Japanese material. I wish they would have just put the poster on here. That would have been even better, but this is still pretty close. I'm not exactly sure why we've got this big blue corner here with the text and the stuff. Again, using the gun barrel jacket for the gatefold with the original title font. Looks really impressive, but again is right out of the US 1992 VHS series. I do like how they have the original James Bond material up here with the credit for Broccoli and Saltzman. And then over here on the second panel, we've got the original Japanese poster, again in black and white. So once again, same rear cover design to match the other discs. Looks really fantastic, but again, this is literally just porting the US master. I really don't know if I can recommend these as, if people want the ultimate best quality for the films on LD and want them letterboxed, because they are literally the US versions just simply repressed in Japan. And you do lose that those CAV side 3s, which for me is the biggest disappointment of these, that you don't maintain those. But that seems like something that was apparently pretty common in Japan. They didn't do the whole action climax and CAV for your viewing pleasure type idea. They just stuck with CLV straight through. Once again, because the US disc is pretty early for MGM and Letterbox titles and can be a bit noisy, this... Again, it has the sort of feeling of maybe being a hair cleaner here and there because it is a 1993 pressing and stuff. It is much later on. But it's the same master, and a lot of that stuff is baked into the source. So, again, it's pretty much a dead even type scenario, except the US disc does have the third side in CAV, which this does not. Other than that, it's exactly the same. And of course, you will have Japanese subtitles in the bottom letterboxing area. But still, really gorgeous jacket, nice thicker cardstock, lovely package. We didn't get anything fancy like this in the US outside of the Goldfinger Thunderball boxes. So really nice presentation, nice package, but it's pretty much just the US disc copied over. So moving on to Diamonds Are Forever, we have a similar cover to OHMSS using original poster art, but with a blue tinting for the Secret Agent 007 text, original title credit font. And this one, they've literally just used the entire majority for the original one sheet, the little bit of the Japanese logo here. But as you can tell, this is pretty much VHS jacket dimensions right here. But still, really impressive, very nice that they used original art and don't have a bunch of stuff over it. Again, I wish they would have just used the whole jacket and not had other stuff and just maybe put the title font and everything in the bottom corner, or literally use the US one sheet with the yellow Diamonds Are Forever across the top. But still, it's original poster art, which should be on the front of a movie jacket, and so it's really great that it's here. I'm just not too sure what they were after with the blue and the text and the text overlaid over everything. But still, it looks really nice, and at least it is using some original art, which again, the US letterbox releases did not. Again, you get the Obi strip. This has the first printing style with the list of titles. Now you can see this in its full glory, and again, you see the blue runs across the whole side. Again, beautiful gatefold, very simple but very elegant, wonderfully striking. Again, sort of taken from the US 1992 VHS run, but just looks gorgeous on a gatefold. And then here on the right, we have the Japanese one sheet. So again, I don't know why they just didn't use this for the whole front cover, but at least that was sort of what they did, I guess. And here's the matching rear, which uses original stills, and rather amusingly, they use the classic Sean still from Russia with Love mixed in there. And then they've got some dead space, so they also use the From Russia with Love one sheet, but with tinting applied. And then I guess they didn't have another photo that small, so they literally just put the Secret Agent 007 text on the bottom corner, which is it's always kind of amusing to see when they accidentally use the wrong photo, or they have some dead space, so they just throw some color on it or something. Again, this is literally porting the same master as the US release, so it is the same source master. It's spread over 2 discs, 3 sides, but again, you lose the third side being in CAV. It is PCM mono, so it is literally porting over the US disc. However, Diamond's got 2 printings. It got the original standalone letterbox printing, which does have side 3 in CAV, but then the second version popped up in the Connery Collection Volume 2 box set, which was the same master, but because box sets run one film to the next across sides, I can't remember for sure. I don't think that one is CAV on the third side. So the Connery Collection version does not have CAV either. So the only way to get the finale of the film in CAV is actually tracking down the original US letterbox pressing, the standalone version with the white cover and Bond artwork. So if you have the Connery box set and you're going to this, you're not going to miss having the ending not being in CAV. But I do feel it's a missed opportunity they didn't do that. There is another factor that I should have already mentioned. Can't believe I didn't. But there's another factor of these Japanese versions that makes them not only a bit different than usual discs, but also a bit harder to navigate. And that is the fact they don't have chapter stops on them. I was very surprised to find that, popping in the discs and just seeing the timer start, but with no chapter indication. None of them really do of the original 16. So that's another thing you'll have to put up with. If you're somebody who likes having chapter stops, well, then these discs will frustrate you to no end because they literally don't have any. Again, there is maybe the perceived notion of this disc appearing a little bit cleaner than the US versions, but it seems pretty much the same as the Connery box set, which was, again, a couple years after, or a little bit of time after the original standalone pressing. But again, you will have to get that standalone original US Bond letterbox issue if you want side 3 and CAV. But otherwise, really nice jacket and presentation and art, but it is literally the US disc just copied over. So now we move on to Live and Let Die, which here I think they really nailed their art design. So here we have the original McGuinness one-sheet artwork, and they've actually extended it onto the background, so Roger's head and the explosion sort of pokes out. Looks fantastic. You get the Japanese 007 logo and title on the bottom. You get the main cast and credit information there on the bottom. It's just a much better usage of the art on the jacket, and the sizing's a lot better and a lot more impressive. And they did keep their secret agent lettering, so I think this is the point where they really figured out how to use this and use the LD jacket dimensions a lot better. This one has the second type of OP strip. And now you can see the jacket without the OB over it. Really gorgeous gatefold that matches. And again, while it looks pretty simple, when you have this in your hands, it's just so impressive. And again, the really thick premium cardstock and lovely sheen of the jacket. It's not glossy, but it sort of has the feeling of a slight glossiness. It's really impressive and very wonderful when you're actually holding it in your hands. I don't know how well that'll translate over this video, but again, these are a lot more impressive when you hold them in your hands. And then the second panel has the Japanese one sheet. Now, once again, this is literally porting over the US master, but of course, since this film is 185, the subtitles do kind of intrude into the picture some, which they will do with on Golden Gun as well. It's not horrible, but you will have to be used to subtitles on the non-scope films. Live and Let Die did go through 2 printing runs on the Letterbox edition in the US. The first version mistakenly had some issues with the audio. It did have some dropouts, and the US version includes the isolated score and effects track, and it was supposed to be on the analog track, but what they did on that first pressing was they accidentally mixed it in on the digital, but on one track of the digital. And because this is a mono film and that is a mono music and effects track, they sort of share the same real estate on the digital and the analog. but there were some dropouts on the audio anyway. So they did a repressing with a slightly altered cover, so the credits are a bit different and the catalog number's different to tell them apart. And they just they fixed all that and got the music and effects on the analog and the film soundtrack on the digital. But they also somehow there was a slight uptick in picture quality on that, and I do think that release does look significantly better and improved. The color timing is a little bit better. The image is a bit sharper. Just feels a bit tighter, and that does have side 3 and CAV. But this version, of course, it is across 3 sides, but no CAV encoding whatsoever. And since this film is literally 2 hours 1 minute, it is a very, very short side 3. Again, I don't know why they wouldn't have just gone ahead and done CAV for side 3, since it is just barely over 2 hours. But at least, it's still solid, and it's the same US transfer. However, this is the same transfer as the first US disc, so it doesn't have the improvements of that second pressing, which most people would say, it's just minor improvements, but in LD, even minor picture improvements can be massive because it is Laserdisc and standard definition and everything. So this one, you definitely get the benefits of having the wonderful packaging and original art and everything. But in this case, I do think you really have to get that second US corrected pressing, because it does have the better picture, the better color timing, and it does have the better side 3 because it's full CAV encoding. But still beautiful artwork, and since this is my favorite film, I am so happy to have the Japanese version, because I can't have enough copies of Bond films, and Live and Let Die in particular, and I'm in love with the original one sheet, so having that on an LD jacket is just fantastic. Moving on to The Man with the Golden Gun, once again, much better usage of the whole jacket dimension, original McGinnis poster artwork, much larger, looks much more impressive because it's not, boxed in tiny in the center. Original title font, original Japanese text, just looks really nice. Again, I wish they'd used it for the whole LD jacket, and this is one of the cases where the US version finally did do that. The proper Letterbox release, which was the last Letterbox Bond disc non-box set in the US, along with the MGM License to Kill reissue, uses the McGinnis artwork across the whole jacket, and it's really one of the best Bond LD jackets ever. This is sort of getting there, but it's not quite as impressive as the US disc, where they did finally get it right on the jacket. So the obi strip off. Again, using the second type of obi strip. Again, wonderful gun barrel gatefold. And then here on the second panel, they use a collage of stills mixed in with these blue boxes instead of a one sheet. Again, matching rear to go with the others. Looks wonderful. This is pretty much the exact same disc as what we got on the Letterbox edition. Golden Gun was one of the films where they kept it opened up for the longest time. So the first really good LD, the more classics version, is 133 and has a nice sounding mono track to it. But the Letterbox version came out in '94 in the US, properly letterboxed from the same source apparently, because the image looks like the same source print was used. But it is properly letterboxed at 185. But the audio makes a huge jump forward, like they were copying directly from a master source. It's still seemingly mono, but almost feels stereo at times. It's so much more engaging. So it's a huge leap forward. But what's interesting to note here, this is Letterbox, but this disc, of course, came out in '93, practically a year before the US version did. So this is one case where it came out in Japan first, and it's not copying a US disc. Has the same improved PCM mono as what turned up on that US Letterbox pressing. So this is literally the same disc that we got in '94. It does not have CAV side 3, unfortunately, but that's, again, how all these Japanese pressings are. And again, no chapter stops. But other than that, it is identical to what turned up on the US Letterbox pressing a year later. And if you've seen my other videos, you know how I rave on that disc being fantastic and being one of the best Bond Letterbox LDs in terms of just overall quality. So this is, pretty much the exact same thing, just again, without CAV Side 3 and without chapter stops, unfortunately. So for The Spy Who Loved Me, as you can tell, they once again changed up their jacket design. They made the poster art even bigger in the center. Once again, extended it beyond a box. Here on the bottom, it extends out in these sort of sliver sections. And here, the entire center and top art extends outside of the sort of square box dimensions. And then they changed the background to red, but kept the secret agent writing in the background. It's a very striking jacket. I do like the red background, which I assume they went with to sort of match the red and pink and purple background of the original Bob Peak art here. So it's a really impressive looking jacket. Again, I wish they would have just used the poster art across the whole jacket, but it looks really nice. Again, I could do without the Secret Agent 007 wording in the background, but it still looks really impressive, and it stands out because it's the only one of this series that has a red jacket. This has the first type of Obi strip with the printed list. And again, just really impressive looking. I do really like the red. It was not very common that LD jackets just went for a full red background. Again, the awesome gun barrel gatefold with original text font. And then on the right, once again, it's using production stills in black and white. Once again, the matching rear cover to match the other discs. Gun barrel looks gorgeous on a black background. This does have the stereo surround mix that showed up on the first US Letterbox LD. And of course, Spy did premiere with this stereo surround 4-track mix, but most people saw it in mono on the original release. So now the mono is the rare audio mix of the film that does not appear on modern releases. This is, again, the same exact disc we got in the US, so this matches the original Letterbox LD release, which was the first time we got a version of the stereo, or I should say the 4-track surround mix matrixed in. It is the same exact transfer, has the same exact bits of damage. There's one bit of damage in the audio that I'm used to on that US disc. It's one point where it distorts when they first approach Atlantis, when Bond and Anya are brought to Stromberg, and we get the great, the large looming shot of Atlantis and the optical work there. There's some distortion in the audio there that's also present here. They, of course, did do this film as part of the THX remastering series, so it's one of the handful that got the late release final LD, and then the very first DVD in the THX line, were those same handful of titles, and then that morphed into the special edition line of DVDs eventually. When they did that THX process, though, on all the titles, they did seem to pump up the color timing a bit too much, and they did tweak the audio a bit, bringing it into 5.1 discrete, and then just... So those they're improved technically, but the historical accuracy is a bit more in question. So I really do prefer on those titles the older versions. So I do prefer the older version of Spy on that US disc, even though it is quite a bit noisier and has defects from being an older disc from 89, 90. I prefer that version, and I prefer the audio on it because it is, it feels much more untouched, and was the first time we got that 4-track mix on disc anywhere. So this being a porting of that, I did appreciate. Again, unfortunately, no chapter stops, and I was hoping the quality would be a lot better because this disc is from 93, but once again, there's not really any perceivable difference outside of it. It's maybe a little bit cleaner of a pressing because it is Japanese and from 1993. It even has the same very iffy shot that's in the US disc. If you know that particular disc, the original Letterbox pressing, there's one particular scene that for some reason looks really bad. It switches to a look that looks like super video-ish, like they were trying some early form of very heavy-handed edge enhancement and noise reduction. It's the scene where Bond and Commander Carter are talking on the submarine right before they bring in the wet bike, where Bond is saying he has to go rescue Anya from Atlantis. So for some reason, that scene looks terrible, but the rest of the transfer looks perfectly fine. Um, I just have gotten used to that weird quirk of the US disc, and that same thing happens here on this. So this is once again a direct copy of the US master, but pressed in Japan with the wonderful art and everything. Once again, you do lose the side 3 being in CAV. So with Spy having the great action climaxes, that is, again, a bit of a letdown. But again, this is maybe just a tiny bit cleaner in terms of pressing. But outside of that, it is literally the original US Letterbox presentation, just copied over with much fancier artwork and jacket presentation. So Moonraker follows in the same way that Spy did, in that we have larger poster art, a different colored background. So this is, of course, on a black background with the secret agent writing still in the background. Moonraker was the first Bond film in Dolby Stereo. So we're getting the original Dolby Stereo mix, matrix encoded as PCM. This also pretty much replicates the original US Letterbox pressing to a T. It's the exact same master. You do lose that CAV side 3 again. And just like the THX Spy, the THX Moonraker, I think also kind of boosts the color a bit too much. And there's just something about when they bumped up the sound to 5.1 in that remixing process, it just seemed to lose something. And I really do think the Dolby Surround on the original US Letterbox and this copy, which ports that master, it just sounds better to my ears than every other version of the film on disc, which all seem to stem from that 5.1 remix job done for the THX run. So again, while this is an older master and it's got some baked-in problems and some aliasing and stuff, I think the color's a lot better, and I just like the overall sound and appearance more than the THX version, although that is, very much technologically superior and a cleaner transfer and everything. So again, this is replicating the exact experience of the US disc, but with the added headaches of no CAV side 3 and no chapter stops, because I guess they hated chapters in Japan like Universal hated chapters. So it can be frustrating if you have to stop the movie a lot, or if you want to go to specific points. But if you're just watching the movie straight through, it's not so much a problem. But I didn't know that going in, that these would not have chapter stops. This has the first type of Obi strip. And again, looks really nice on a black background. Here's the gatefold. And then here is interesting. They used some stills, and then they use just a textless version of the original advance art, which is the famous image of Roger without helmet in spacesuit, so just zooming off into orbit. So again, matching style rear looks fantastic, but again, it's obviously letterbox scope, Dolby Surround encoded, original Dolby Stereo mix, SPCM, spread across 3 sides, but it is fully CAV, so you lose that CAV side 3 from the US release. Thankfully, on almost all of these, they do retain the original trailers that are on the US versions. Not all of them do, but for the most part, if it was on the US disc, it's going to be here on the Japanese version. I must admit, what first really clued me into the different Obi strips was there were a couple duplicates of the same title, and I in the lot of these that I picked up, I didn't exactly know why, because they seemed the same and they had the same catalog numbers. But then finally, I noticed that. As you can see here on this second copy of Moonraker, it does have the different Obi strips. So it's the same disc, same catalog number, but they did, I guess, just do maybe a second printing, or they just changed the Obi strip around after a certain point to this second type. So here we have For Your Eyes Only, which once again is literally porting over the same master as the US disc. Again, I think these Japanese versions of the later scope films, it's maybe a tad bit cleaner in terms of the pressing, because again, it's Japanese in 1993 as opposed to US 1989, 1990, 91. But it is the same transfer with the slightly changed aspect ratio. This film and Octopussy are not quite the full 2:3:5 on disc, but they still look fantastic for their era. Not top line LD, of course, because they are older transfers, but the color is nice and they didn't really mess around with anything. And the soundtrack is the original Dolby Stereo, PCM encoded, and still to my ears is the best sounding version of this film anywhere. It has a nice sonic clarity and real oomph to it that is not quite there on the 5.1 remix. So really the Bill Conti score comes to life on this track far more than the remix. And the remix shouldn't have changed anything, but you never know what sort of EQ or compression they apply over the upmixing process. It's almost never a completely hands-off process of upmixing to 5.1 as it should be. So this is a case where I really do think the LD has the better sounding track, and it's the complete original Dolby Stereo. So again, they have used more of the original art. Here they're using the British one sheet, but just the center of it. Looks really nice, although the text in red sort of blends into the background and is not as distinct. The Obi strip off, which is the second type of Obi strip. And I will go ahead and mention this. This is the one case where I did notice a cover variation. The discs themselves are the same. The catalog number is the same, but this is another one where there's a duplicate in the lot, and I kept looking at them over and over, and then I suddenly noticed this one does have a cover difference. So not only does this one have the other type of Obi strip. Now, of course, it looks identical, but the reason why I'm doing this is this should make it pretty obvious. The one thing they did change is the 007 logo. This one uses the older style that was more commonly used in the 1960s, and this is the fully modernized, updated style that really was used throughout the 80s, but pretty much was formalized in the 90s. So that's just something I guess they felt the need to change or something. But that's the one printing difference I've found on all the jackets. On the couple duplicates that I've had, for some reason they decided to change to the more modernized, updated 007 logo. So I guess this is maybe a second jacket, or who knows, maybe this is the second jacket, but I would assume this one with the modern 007 logo is maybe a second printing. So again, we get the wonderful gatefold with the gun barrel, the For Your Eyes Only title text, and then the side panel is the famous legs image of the main U.S. campaign poster, but just the image itself without any text or font or anything. So here's the rear, again with the matching rear design. Once again, this is scope CLV with the Dolby Stereo matrix encoded on the PCM digital track. And again, this is actually porting that US master. So if you've seen the US Letterbox disc, this is exactly the same. Again, it does lose the side 3 CAV, so that is CLV encoded, and it doesn't have chapter stops. But other than that, it's exactly the same. The only difference, once again, is this pressing may be just the tiniest bit cleaner in terms of the pressing quality, because it is, Japanese and from a couple years down the road. But other than that, it's pretty much identical, and you then have to deal with the Japanese subtitles in the bottom letterboxing area. But again, if you zoom in on the picture on your setup, it's not really intrusive, and they never come into the actual picture, so you can cover them up or matte them out however you like, and it doesn't cause an issue. But it is literally the same as the US disc. So this is still my personal favorite version of the film on disc. I just wish it didn't have the different aspect ratio where you're not getting the exact full 2:3:5 width. It's relatively close, but this was their first attempt at letterboxing the film, which thankfully helped it out a lot, because seeing this in pan and scan growing up was not a pleasant experience. And I still think the audio track on LD, the original Dolby Stereo mix, is unbeaten on any other release. So this is still a handsome presentation. I just wish it retained that side 3 CAV from the US release, but otherwise it's pretty much exactly the same, just with the fancier packaging. So moving on to Bond 13, here is the Japanese disc for Octopussy, which beautifully uses original poster artwork. The primary campaign art was the Bond and Octopussy standing, where she has the multiple arms, each holding a different element from the film or something menacing. And this is what we got here in the States and the UK as well, but various other posters and some of the other UK art and the quad especially have the additional bits of action, which they very nicely included here on the rest of the jacket. Again, we get the Secret Agent 007 lettering in the background, and it looks nice. I just wish there was just the whole poster, or, they just literally used the main art for the whole jacket without the lettering behind it. But overall, it looks really nice, and anytime you get original art on a jacket, I'm happy. Slip the obi strip off. It is the second variety on the back. And now you can see the art without the obi on it. And again, these are pieces of what you see on the UK quad poster and some of the other posters as well. So here is the gatefold, again with the matching gun barrel and original title font. And just to show you, here is the matching 1992 remastered VHS release. This is, again, one of the handful I have of this, but you can, quite easily see where they got this idea from. And then the second panel gives you a nice selection of black and white stills. While I have this here, I would like to point out what I said here about how they used more original art, but they've got it down here and they've got all this wasted space. Well, here's what they did on the VHS release. And as you could see, they kept the original dimensions of sorts and sized it all for VHS jacket artwork. So you can see what they were going for, and this is one of those that definitely shares a lot with the 1992 VHS design. And of course, this also has its own little gatefold. Again, matching rear cover to go with the rest of the series. Really looks lovely, and this is giving us a scope transfer. Again, like For Your Eyes Only, it's not quite exactly 2.35. There's a little bit of ratio weirdness going on, but it's still letterboxed and definitely not pan and scanned, and still a great way to watch the film. But it's not quite hitting that full 2.35 all the way across. It's more like a 2.21 or something like that. It's pretty close, but you can definitely tell there's a little missing on the sides. But anyway, it has Dolby Surround encoded PCM. It's the film's original Dolby Stereo mix. And again, Octopussy is the one confirmed film of the Bond series that does have a 70mm blow-up release that was a general release, not just a premiere print like Spy and Moonraker. But it did get that really to compete with Never Say Never Again. Originally, they were going to come out at the same time. Never Say Never Again also got 70mm blow-ups, and that was really the era where 70mm blow-up prints for big event films had taken off, which is why I'm pretty sure Eon was behind that. I'm sure MGM was hot and heavy to market this as a 70mm premium experience as well. So the mix would have been upped to Dolby 70mm 6-track there, but from the original same 4-track source mix, left, center, right, mono, surround. So even though it's been up to 5.1 on later releases, starting with the DVDs and stuff, like For Your Eyes Only, I think it does kind of lose something in the process. MGM sometimes did that with their 5.1 mixes. That started in the late days of Laserdisc. Even with some of the THX Bonds, I feel the 5.1 loses something from the earlier PCM Matrix stereo surround tracks. So I always tell people, if they have the chance, just watch Octopussy with the 2.0 surround, which was added back for the Ultimate Editions and the US Blu-rays, which I was very thankful for. It's a very minor thing, but I still think the LD has the best sounding presentation of the film on disc. But with that out of the way, this is, again, the same exact transfer we got on the US Letterbox release, which also has the same slight aspect ratio weirdness. It's absolutely identical. Again, the only nod I can give to this disc is maybe it's just a a tad cleaner in terms of it's a later video pressing. Like the actual disc pressing is, of course, from '93 in Japan with the fancier art and everything. But once again, I have to point out no chapter stops, and the big thing for me is you lose the action climax in CAV. So once again, it's CLV side 3. Other than that, it seems and it plays out exactly like the US version. The only problem with this particular copy, unfortunately, it has a crack in disc 1, and I didn't know this until I started to actually play the disc. It's a very hairline crack in the center of the disc. It's not on the outside edge, it's on the inside edge, and of course that means it affects the pre-title sequence. I was really gutted because this is one of those that unfortunately it wasn't one of the ones that I had a duplicate copy of, because there's a couple I have duplicate copies of, and it's like, why couldn't it be the one that was cracked? Because these are, extremely rare to find here in the US, usually very pricey. But thankfully, it only really affected the first couple minutes of the pre-title sequence. So I was able to supplement with my US copy for the first, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then everything else played through just fine, and disc 2 was fine. So unfortunately, this is the one disc that is affected adversely because it has a small hairline crack at the very beginning of it. But that is, something you will encounter with all physical or optical media. You can't get disc warps or cracks or all kinds of issues, or, that either happened in shipping or happened at the factory. Nobody caught it, or just happened over time through the various owners of the disc before you. I really haven't had too many problems with cracked discs. It can happen, but it was such a shame to have it happen to one of these. But thankfully, again, it was very, very minor. So once again, this is pretty much just the US disc copied over with a fancier gatefold, beautiful art. Again, just maybe a tad cleaner on like the actual disc pressing itself. It doesn't really make much of a difference in terms of the picture quality. I'm sure some might argue that differently, but I did extensive comparisons, A/Bing back and forth on the same player, just trying to find any sort of difference. And again, the original U.S. pressings are just fine, and I've watched them for years without any issues. They are a product of their time. They have some older LD issues because they are from the early '90s, but they're still solid, great discs. And so when you look at these Japanese versions and you're really scrutinizing to try and find any sort of difference, and there really isn't one. So I know I'm really dispelling the notion of, the Japanese pressings are so much better, but again, you lose the CAV final sides on all the side 3s, and you lose chapter stops, which that sounds pretty minor. And again, if you're watching the movie straight through, that's not really an issue, but that is definitely something you do miss when you go looking for it. Here we have the Japanese disc for A View to a Kill, which, like the Octopussy disc, takes the central advertising campaign image, this time of Bond and Mayday. This was used on the ad campaign with the tagline, "Has James Bond finally been his match?" with this beautiful artist rendering of both Roger Moore and Grace Jones. But like the Octopussy jacket, they've once again put the secret agent 007 writing all over the background. Again, it would have looked a lot better with just a plain white background. But that's minor because it is original poster art. It's using pretty much the whole LD jacket dimensions, and then you get the 007 logo, the Japanese text, and the A View to a Kill casting credits. So it does look rather nice, very striking. Again, anytime original poster art is on the jacket, I'm happy. But again, I wish they'd come up with something a bit more uniform, and just had not had all the secret agent lettering all the time. But again, it is what it is. It's more me just minor quibbling, but it's like these are so close to being perfect with using the original imagery and the original poster artwork that it's like I wish they could be perfect. They're so close. Let me slip the obi off. And this one has the first style obi. Laserdisc graphics insert. So here is the gun barrel gatefold. And then over here we've got, as typical, black and white stills, but they've got some color bars on here. So this is one of the only ones where they have some sort of extra background color instead of just having it all black to match the gun barrel. So here's the matching rear cover. Again, looks just wonderful. Again, this is, of course, scope 235 widescreen. There's no ratio weirdness on this one like the previous two films. And you get the original Dolby Stereo mix on the PCM track. And once again, I know I sound like a broken record on these. This is literally a direct porting of the US Letterbox Master. So as with practically every disc I've talked about so far, it is exactly the same on as what you get on the standard US Letterbox copy. Again, I think the only benefit may be that the actual pressing quality, it has the slight appearance of somehow being slightly cleaner, and but again, that may be just the fact that this is the newer Japanese one, and I'm automatically, my mind is wanting to say it's better just because it's newer and it's Japanese and it's got the fancier jacket. In a real world, real life scenario, again, I literally had this and the US disc, and I kept, swapping back and forth and even pausing on individual frames, just trying to find any difference, and they look identical. There's no difference. And of course, the sound is the same, presentation is the same, but once again, you get the quirks of the Japanese versions, no chapter stops, and you also lose side 3 and CAV. So that again just kills me. So being a CAV nerd, so that's what you lose for the fancy art. You lose chapter stops and you lose the side 3 CAV action. I will say on this one, I talked about the previous two. I think the LDs sound best overall. I think For Your Eyes Only has a lot more punch to it on the LD than it does on the later versions, the up mixes. But on A View to a Kill, it's a night and day difference. Like this is I advise people to go towards those on the previous two films for the LD tracks, and I know most people probably aren't going to notice much of a difference, but this one you will. It's right off the bat. There's so much more low end on this release, and you hear it throughout the pre-title sequence, and particularly in the opening title song, the Duran Duran title song. So much more low end. It sounds wonderful, and it's so much more alive than the later versions that turned up on DVD and Blu-ray and stuff. So this is one where you really get the full impact of the original Dolby Stereo track, and I heartily encourage people, whether you look at the US or the Japanese letterbox copy, watch this film on LD. The audio is very much more of an engaging experience. It has so much more low end to it that it feels so much more alive. Really a night and day difference compared to the DVD and Blu-ray. So once again, not to sound like a broken record, this is literally the same disc master we got on the US copy, just with the beautiful Japanese art and gatefold, nicer looking presentation in terms of the actual packaging, but again, you do lose chapter stops, and the third side is CLV instead of CAV. So Avtac was one of the films that had a duplicate copy, and again, I looked at these for ages trying to figure out why some discs they had just two copies that looked practically identical and really are identical. So as with some of the others I've gone over before, this second copy, you flip over to the back, and sure enough, it's got the different type of obi strip. So otherwise, it's identical. I spent ages poring over these that were duplicates, trying to figure out why there were two discs of certain films that looked practically the same in every way. And then suddenly I happened to notice the different obi strip backs when I had them side by side. And it's like, oh, that's what it is. So this is just another one where it's a duplicate. It's got the different obi strip, and there's really no reason for me to keep some of these duplicates, but since it is a different obi strip and I am a gigantic James Bond nerd, of course I'm going to keep them, because any potential chance of there being variations means I have to keep them. It's the same reason why I have so many printings of some of the Bond paperback novels and some of the hardcover novels, simply because there's a printing variation that I found, and thus I have to keep it. So here we go with the Japanese release of The Living Daylights. And as you can see very clearly, it took them 15 films, but they finally nailed using the entire cover for the original poster art. And they very lovingly used the UK poster art by Brian Basuth, who for this film, I think really created was really the definitive James Bond poster, in that it has every element of the classic Bond poster. It utilizes the classic gun barrel image. The likenesses of the actors and actresses is spot on. Every great moment from the film is here, and inside the gun barrel motif itself with the blood running down, it's just I don't think there is a better single Bond poster that it really encapsulates every part of a James Bond film. So I was just so happy that they finally used this for a video release somewhere, and really made it pop and just take up the whole jacket. It's on a black background, so it's literally getting, a beautiful reproduction of the original UK poster design. There is one small quirk that I really hate, though, because of course nothing can be perfect. If you look very closely, inside the gun barrel iris here, where they have the beautiful rendering of Timothy Dalton, the printers of this Japanese disc somehow felt the need to still slip in their Secret Agent 007 lettering. So instead of it being the plain white that it was on the original poster, and as the gun barrel would be, they've got that lettering here. So it's like peeking through, like it's like, haha, I'm still here. Look at me. So yeah, that's my only. If I had to complain about anything on this jacket, it's like, why? Why would you slip that in there? But I guess they did to just tie it into the others. But other than that, one of the best LD jackets ever. And of course, you have the Japanese 007 logo up here, the MGM UA logo in the corner. You slip the obi off so you can just get the full impact of this. And of course, this has the obi with the list backing. Again, with the gun barrel gatefold, and then moving over to the side, you get the black and white stills, but the main one is, of course, the US one-sheet art, which used the Dalton pose inside the gun barrel, and then the lady in question, who I always felt was probably supposed to indicate Kara with the blonde hair and the white dress and stuff, but obviously I think was a model. But of course, this is what we got here in the US, and this is still a great poster. It's still one of the great series posters, very striking, but it just does not really have the same amazing quality of the UK printing, or sorry, UK poster, I should say. So, of course, have to have the matching rear to go with the other discs in the series, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say this is my favorite jacket out of all of these, because it keeps with the series design they set up for this letterbox run of Laserdisc printings, and it uses original poster art, and it uses my preferred original UK poster art across the whole front of the jacket. So I'm in love with this particular disc and its jacket, its packaging, everything. Once again, it's 235 scope. It's Dolby Stereo encoded on the PCM. It's the original Dolby Stereo mix, and it is literally the exact same as the US disc. I already think the US disc looks fantastic for an MGM letterbox transfer of that era. Of course, this was 1987 for the film's production, so it was one of the newer films in the series. So obviously, it was going to translate to Laserdisc very well, and it looks beautiful. But once again, it's really not any different from the US disc, which I already think is really outstanding for LD at the time. So this is, again, a matter of you want the Japanese version for the fancier packaging, the original poster artwork, the awesome gatefold, the yellow disc labels, and the matching rear and stuff. But otherwise, it's exactly the same as what you get on the US disc. And again, I will mention about the audio. These films always sound better on Laserdisc, and The Living Daylights has a really great Dolby Stereo mix for 1987, and it does sound better on the Laserdisc releases than later versions, and the 5.1 up mix just doesn't have the same punch to it. So, but again, this film, it's also got the weird oddity that the US Pan and Scan disc, the Pan and Scan Laserdisc, is directly film print sourced and looks great, even though it's Pan and Scan, with a lot of nice detail, and has a different sort of color timing in a lot of places to the Letterbox edition, which is also great. So it's a film where you have that sort of alternate, and the color time has kind of changed a little bit over the years on various releases through DVD and Blu-ray, but the Laserdisc is still the widescreen Laserdisc is still my preferred and favorite home viewing method, particularly because of the audio. So this was a really nice way to watch it, but once again, you got to keep in mind you do lose your chapter stops. And if I'm remembering correctly, I do believe the US release is all CLV. I don't think it has a CAV side, so you don't have to worry about that here in terms of losing a CAV side. But otherwise, just like the rest of these, it follows in the same line. It's always using the US master from the Letterbox release, but here you just get the really fantastic jacket and the spiffier packaging. So, of course, I have a second copy of the Japanese Living Daylights release, and you may be asking, well, what's so different about this? Of course, you look up here in the corner, you see the gold stamp indicating this is a Laserdisc rental copy. In the Japanese market and other markets, there were significant printings for specific rental copies of films, which usually were absolutely identical to the standard release, but they were intended for usage in video rental stores. And usually they will have a different catalog number like this does, but otherwise it is, pretty much exactly the same as the standard release I just went over. But you have the different catalog number, you have the spine's a little different and says rental, and you have the rental indicator stamped on here. The gatefold is the same, and again the jacket feels practically identical, and the rear looks the same. And so I always wondered why some people really liked collecting certain rental discs, specifically the Bond rental discs. And then when I found out the reason why, I was like, oh, well, that seems, it's cool, but, I don't know if I would ever, want to collect all of these simply because of that. And then I got this copy in my hands and I looked at the disc itself. And again, the reason why a lot of people like to collect these, and now I totally understand it. So I will show you now. This is why. The Laserdisc rental copy not only has a slightly different but also custom label, with it having the black label and then the Laserdisc rental is red, but as you can clearly see, the actual material used for the LD itself has the appearance of making the LD look as if it is golden. And this is so freaking cool that it is beyond words. So now I totally understand why people collect the Laserdisc rental copies of the Bond films, and now I want more of these, even though I don't really need them, because they are, exactly the same as the standard Japanese Letterbox copies. But this is just really cool, and I couldn't resist showing it off because, again, you know gold discs exist for the rental copies, and it's just that the alloy's different, and so it looks gold. Same thing when there were runs of DVDs that had the gold bottoms. The only thing that was ever really gold was when they did the 24 karat gold CDs for the Audio Fidelity label did a number of those that was supposed to enhance the sound quality of PCM on CDs, but they never actually did that with Laserdisc. So this is just the plastic is gold instead of it actually being literally made of gold. But it just looks really, really cool. Hong Kong discs and Japanese discs did this sometimes, but it was a lot of the rentals did this as well, I guess to differentiate them as being specifically rentals. But it just looks so cool that I had to talk about this, and so you could actually get an idea of what these look like in person. And yeah, it's just that the disc is a different color, but it's really cool. I mean, it's gold colored. What's not to love? So now we have License to Kill, which follows in the same sort of idea we've seen packaging-wise with the previous films, using original poster artwork, taking up most of the jacket, and then they took the red background idea from the spy jacket and used that for the rest of it. And as you can see, they are using the same gun barrel image from the gatefolds, but they tinted it red to sort of match the red face of Sanchez in the background of the poster art. This, of course, is the primary US 1 sheet they used. And it looks really great. You have the Japanese title here on the bottom in gold. Looks fantastic. But once again, the dreaded secret agent lettering has been brought up and worked into the background. So in the white background of the poster, you can see it right there in gray. So again, it is what it is. It identifies it as part of the series, but I wish they would have just left that out there because somebody had to literally go in there and put that in the background. But again, it's pretty much the US one sheet is the art, and the red gun barrel background looks really freaking awesome. So again, I don't know why they kept insisting on doing that lettering, but it is a nice looking jacket, and it really does work. And the red, of course, is makes you immediately think, oh yes, it's a darker movie, and of course it's Licensed to Kill, so it fits the tone of the film. So the OB off, it has the list style back. Here's the gatefold, and here on the side panel, they used one of the promo poster shots of Timothy Dalton, but it's tinted aqua for some reason, with a few more stills in the center there. And you get the matching rear cover. Again, looks fantastic. This is scope widescreen, has the original Dolby Stereo as on the PCM. Of course, License to Kill was released in the Dolby Stereo SR system, so it gets the advantage of having the better spectral recording system of Dolby Stereo matrixing, which means the sound field is even more engaging and an even better sonic experience than the Living Daylights, simply because the technology available was a bit better. And really think it's a film underrated for its sound in the year of 1989. Again, I do think the LD does sound better than the upmix. I think MGM, they actually did miss a few, one or two effects here and there are sort of muted in feeling. So I always tell people to always go back to the LD if they possibly can, because it does sound significantly better, I would argue. This is the exact same master that we got on the MGM Letterbox USA release, which was replacing the older original CBS Fox Letterbox presentation. And so that means, like The Man with the Golden Gun, this came out in Japan about a year before we got the same disc in the US. So this is that same master. So that, of course, means it is the PG-13 USA release version of the film, and not like the earlier Japanese pan and scan discs that I went over in my pan and scan video, because that was actually the uncut version, or what is now termed the R-rated or fully uncut version, where you get the few little extra gory bits in the violent scenes, and it doesn't have the edits made to make this PG-13 US cut. Of course, the UK had their own edit that had slight differences. So really, you had the uncut version, you had the US PG-13 version, you had the UK version, and then I think most other territories it was released uncut, but there were some territories that had their own edits that I don't exactly know how many edits that they made to those versions, but I do know the US edits and then the UK edits were a little bit different, and the trimmings were a bit different. And then the uncut version finally premiered in widescreen officially on the 2006 Ultimate Edition DVD and carried over to the Blu-ray, which simply bumped that up to 1080p HD. So if you know the film and you grew up with it, you grew up primarily most likely with the US PG-13 version. And it's kind of hard in some ways going back to these slight edits, because there's one in particular, the very ending of the film, the edit they make when the big fireball comes up. Again, when I talk about edits, these are extraordinarily minor when you look at them in terms of runtime, but it can be a little jarring going back to the PG-13 edit and the one or two scenes it's there. But again, this was the version that was released theatrically, and it's the version we've seen on video for years and years. And the transfer is quite nice, and just like the US disc, far beyond what we got on the first CBS Fox release, which actually can be prone to laser rot, and my copy of that actually does have some speckling on side 3. But again, this is an exact copy of what we got in 1994. So a year later in the US, we got this same exact disc and master. But again, this is Japanese, so that means 3 sides, CLV, no CAV side 3, and there's no chapter stops. So, yeah. And on the US release, we did get the original poster art, but it was across the whole jacket without, anything else going on. So, again, it was one of the two, the other being Man with the Golden Gun. Those were the last two Letterbox MGM single standalone films we got of the main run. And again, they were literally released about a year after these Japanese versions came out. So, again, in terms of looking at the discs themselves, they are practically identical outside of, no CAV and no chapter stops here. So again, this has a nice gatefold, but the US copy that MGM put out does have a nice gatefold and does have a nice jacket. So this is one example. The Man with the Golden Gun is the other one where it's really a toss-up because they're practically the same disc and they both have great packaging. So we have the 6-year gap that brings us to Goldeneye and the successful relaunching of the series in the 1990s. This, of course, is the Japanese letterboxed AC3 THX certified pressing of Goldeneye, and it uses the European version of the key art, which you don't see practically ever here in the US because it's always using the iconic US one-sheet art. Here in Europe and other territories, they did change the imagery, and sometimes you just got posters or images of this photo type of Brosnan, but sometimes it's done like this where it's mixed over and in the top of the main key art that, of course, was on the entire worldwide campaign. So it is cool that we got the alternative European or foreign territory art on the Japanese jacket that helps it stand apart from the U.S. counterpart and gives it its own identity and flavor. And it's almost like having your own poster of the foreign Goldeneye poster, but of course not having to pay the expense of getting an original European territory poster for Goldeneye, here in 2021. So definitely frameable, looks really nice. And of course, you have the updated obi, and I love that in the Japanese lettering, they actually kept the Goldeneye circle logo. Well, that's here as well, as you can see. You get the 007 logo, you get the THX logo on here, Dolby Surround with the AC3, so it's, the first iteration of that, how they used to call it. So Dolby Surround, AC3 digital, indicating 5.1, widescreen, MGM UA. And of course, I left this on so you could see. This has the special hype sticker for the AC3 track. So instead of the LDG sticker, you get the yellow and red AC3 sticker. There's the rear of the obi strip. And now you get to see the whole of the jacket. Again, they have sized this down, and it looks like this could easily have been printed on a VHS sleeve, but it looks really great. It's on a black background. Again, I wish they would have just printed it over the whole cover, but again, it looks great. And it doesn't have the Secret Agent 007 lettering in the background somewhere. So I am grateful for that. And again, it's like having your own display piece jacket, very frameable, of the foreign poster of Goldeneye. So the alternate poster. So again, it's really well done, and wish more LDs literally just used poster artwork on the jacket. Inside, you have the insert detailing AC3 and how to implement your 5.1 setup at home. Of course, all of this is in Japanese, but it seems to be the exact same thing that we see in the early AC3 releases here in the US. So, of course, looks to be the same insert type as what we got on True Lies and Clear and Present Danger, which I've gone through in my collection videos. When I've gone through those, or any disc that still has the insert, I show those off. But that's what this is. And of course, it's in Japanese, so I can't read it, but you can tell what it's saying by the indicator here and the speaker placement. So, of course, this doesn't use the same gatefold because it's a different release, but it does do a really nice job in terms of layout, design, stills. But like a lot of Japanese gatefolds, and even late release Japanese gatefolds, the printing is entirely in black and white. The liner notes look nice, and it looks like a mixture of cast and crew bios as well. But, of course, it's entirely in Japanese. And I, did not take a first in Oriental languages at Cambridge, so I'm at a loss of trying to read this. Where's my copy of Instant Japanese when I need it? So this gives you your chapter breakdowns with the film spread across 3 sides, just like the standard US release. Now, show you the rear cover. I have to say, this rear jacket is just glorious. It's wonderfully laid out on a black background. They use the promo shot of Pierce Brosnan and with the gun pose. They use the background shot of Bond and Natalia running from the exploding missile train. The whole layout is fantastic and extremely well done. And again, I always like the cool touch of having the title in Japanese, and they kept the Goldeneye circle swirl. Just looks wonderful, and you get the traditional Japanese style information bar on the bottom, and it's in white too, so that really makes it stand out, indicating it has both Dolby Surround on the digital track, it has AC3 on the analog right, has a monofold down on the analog left. It's got the, of course, scope widescreen, THX certified. This is pretty much the same US master as what we got on the standard disc. And, if you've ever heard me talk about Laserdisc, I swear up and down the US standard Goldeneye is the best overall LD ever made. It's outstanding picture quality, very common, extremely cheap, fantastic audio, and a boatload of special features produced by John Cork, who went on to do all of the documentaries for the Thunderball and Goldfinger box sets and the DVDs. So, and tons of trailers, and you get the whole mid-90s World of Bond television special. So it's really jam-packed. And unfortunately, while this disc does share the same master that we got in the US, the same great master, it does not have any of those special features. It does have the trailer section. It's just tacked on to the end of side 3. So you get, I believe it's all of the various trailers and some of the TV spots. I don't think it's all of the ones that were included in the extensive special features of the US release, but you at least get some of those. But you lose the TV special, you lose all the other stuff, and that's really unfortunate. But of course, we all have the US copy by now. It's available anywhere for $1 or $2. If you have a Laserdisc player and you don't have a copy of Goldeneye, then I don't know what you're doing, because it's absolutely essential. I will say this does have the same audio mixes. So this being Dolby, it has what I like to refer to as the club mix of the film. And when I say club mix, that means that the LFE and the bass of the track is significantly higher. So I describe it as it's like watching the movie inside a nightclub, because the bass is just overwhelming. It's so in your face. But the more I look at films of this era and their Laserdisc counterparts, the more I've encountered a number of films where those Dolby tracks and the AC3 have significant more bass and LFE. So I really do think maybe it was a Dolby thing at the time in the 90s, and the digital sound wars between Dolby and DTS and SDDS to try and maybe make Dolby Digital and AC3 stand out, to always mix with some more bass and LFE in mind. So if you like that track, or you've always wanted to hear it, it is present here just as it is on the US disc. It's the same. The Dolby Surround also has that higher low end to it. So even if you can't decode the AC3 with an RF demodulator, because those are rare and hard to find, you get the same increased bass experience in the Dolby Surround PCM track as well. What I will say, transfer-wise in the picture, even though it is the same transfer, this is the one disc out of all of these that has the difference in the IRE brightness level. So when you put this disc on, it looks super dark, and you will have to adjust your brightness settings to bring it up to a standard level we're accustomed to on NTSC discs. I thought all of these would probably have the IRE difference, which is very common to Japanese discs, particularly later pressings. But out of all of these, Goldeneye is the only one that really has that. The other thing, I mean, that's minor and to be expected with Japanese discs, and really all you have to do is adjust your brightness level and maybe fiddle with your contrast just a touch here and there to bring it up to what the US disc looks like. But the real issue, this was pressed by Pioneer Japan, but the pressing itself is actually a little bit noisier than the US release, which I found very surprising, but unfortunately is true. So I actually do think the picture quality does take a little hit compared to the US release, and the DTS release is the same transfer anyway, just pressed by Kuroe instead of Pioneer. But just talking about the standard Pioneer US AC3 pressing that everybody has that's common, I actually do think that looks better because this pressing is just a tad bit noisier. Why, I don't know, but it is noticeable, and I popped in my US disc to compare it, and you can definitely see it. Again, this is me just kind of putting this under the microscope, but it was surprising. So this is one case where I definitely do think the US version is actually better because the presentation, the picture's a little bit cleaner. You get you get one of the best supplemental sections in all of Laserdisc. You get the TV special, get all the trailers and all the TV spots, and it's available for $1 or $2, where this is significantly more expensive. But I will say I am glad that I do have this. It is otherwise, the same great presentation, the same great master. You will have to adjust your brightness to get it to look proper. It has the wonderful sounding Goldeneye club mix, as I like to call it, with all that extra bass to it. And yeah, you at least do get the trailers at the end, but it's unfortunate they dropped all the other extras. And so yeah, beautiful package, beautiful gatefold. I wish it didn't have that issue with the picture being a little bit noisier, but again, Goldeneye is such a great Laserdisc already that any sort of minor quibble with the picture is going to immediately make me start going crazy because I love how good the US disc is. And because I know it so well, I can see when there's something going on with the Japanese version. But beautiful package again. The awesome to have the foreign version of the main poster on the front and this wonderful rear jacket. Just to show you before I forget, they did slightly change the labels. So here you get this MGM label that's red with the Goldeneye title in Japanese. So now we come to Tomorrow Never Dies on the Japanese Letterbox Laserdisc release. And this kind of brings us full circle because a long while ago, I was able to do a review of the Japanese The World's Not Enough release, which is the super limited, very rare late release Japanese late pressing that I've been after ever since I got into Laserdisc, and is my white whale of Laserdisc collecting. Usually goes for well over $300 if it ever pops up on the used market, simply because it is so limited and it's in that select group of the Japanese exclusive late final format releases. So never did I expect that I would get any of the other Japanese titles, let alone all of them in the Letterbox run up to and not including The World Is Not Enough. So it just furthers that notion there's a gaping hole in my Japanese bond collection that is, World Is Not Enough shaped. Sort of a running joke between myself and many people in the Laserdisc collecting community. Everybody knows I'm after one, but I'm trying not to pay the hefty sum it usually goes for. So it was really interesting to look at Tomorrow Never Dies, which I think on the US disc is just about the best NTSC transfer I've ever seen. It's a stunning disc, and it can be had for nothing for the standard version. And I suggest everyone go and get a copy of Tomorrow Never Dies and be blown away. It's one of the titles, like Goldeneye, I think is very much better than the first DVD it had, actually. So here we are once again using the same master we got in the US. This uses a version of the foreign poster artwork and looks really nice on a jacket, particularly the red and the black comes out very much. Have the obi strip here. This one's a little worn because it didn't have the nice fancy sleeve on this particular one. But so we have widescreen 007 here, the MGM Home Entertainment banner from the late 90s, and the Dolby Digital indicator there. Here's the rear. And then I thought this was very interesting. Looking at the gatefold here, you get various cast and crew bios, and of course, all in Japanese, so you can't read it, but and printed in black and white. But the layout reminded me of the gatefold when I reviewed The World's Not Enough Japanese release. So it seems like very much keeping in the same style. So I guess that disc was following in the wake of this disc's gatefold. And what's really cool is if you look over here, they actually include a map which is basically based around the main key location points of the film. So I like the notion of giving a geographical indication of where you're going in the film, whether you've just watched it or whether you've just bought this disc. So it's a nice looking gatefold. Unfortunately, since all this is in Japanese, I can't really read it. But again, I can tell what they were going for, and it does look nice, although would have been nicer if it was actually printed in color. Again, the rear jacket does look really nice. We have black background on the top. You have the bottom bar is all in white, so it gives you the relevant information down there about the scope transfer, the Dolby AC3 5.1, the Dolby Surround PCM. Again, exact same as what we got on the US disc, which was unfortunately without a special features section like we got on Goldeneye. So it's just movie only, and that gets replicated here. It does include the trailer like the US disc does. Get your chapter breakdown here on the side. Really nice looking rear jacket. There's a lot of text, and of course, I can't read any of it, but it does look really nice, very well designed, very well laid out. And, even with this wall of foreign text, it still looks very frameable almost. Again, I think the US disc is the best looking Laserdisc I've ever seen. And unfortunately, once again, as with Goldeneye, this one, it does look a little bit noisier. It's just not pressed as well, and it's got some issues. Again, very minor. This is still an exceptional looking disc because the master is outstanding, but it's not as good as the US disc. I'll just be blunt about it, and it's all down to the pressing not being quite at the same level. But then again, I think the US disc is at the pinnacle of what Laserdisc could achieve, because even the Japanese World's Not Enough, when I reviewed it, it's got one or two minor spots of aliasing and other stuff that and that slight noise in certain parts that actually, now that I've seen the Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies Japanese pressings, makes total sense, because they were all pressed. I believe they were all pressed by Pioneer in Japan, but they all have that same similar slight appearance to them, so I think it's all in the pressing of it. So now that explains a question I had that was nagging at me about reviewing The World's Not Enough all that time ago. So now it makes perfect sense. So if you do have the opportunity to see the US and Japanese versions of Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies, you will notice the Japanese versions, while it's the same source master and it's got hard-coded Japanese subtitles in the bottom in the letterboxing area, it does definitely have a noisier appearance on the Japanese version. Still a great looking disc, but just not quite at that amazing top tier level as the US version. And then another thing, Tomorrow Never Dies clocks in at under 2 hours. And in the US, they were very nice to just go ahead and give us an entire Side 3 and make it full CAVs for the final battle, which they could have fit the whole film onto one disc, but, adding the trailer and the opening logos, they went ahead and gave us a third side just to make sure nothing's cut off. This Japanese version also has 3 sides, but they're all CLV. So this is a disc where literally you get to the end of the film and you flip over to side 3 and it's just a couple minutes long and it's CLV. So they could have very easily made it CAV for the last 5 minutes of the movie, but no, the last 5 minutes of the movie you got to flip side 3 and it's CLV, and it's like, are you kidding? Like, it's a CLV side that's so ridiculously short that it doesn't make any sense why they didn't just make it CAV. And that was the one point in doing all of these disc reviews where I was just like, why wouldn't you just make it CAV? You've got a CLV side that's less than 5 minutes long. Like, come on, guys. Other than that, same as the US disc, you do lose the CAV side 3. the picture quality does take a slight hit in terms of the pressing not being as good as the US disc. But still, this is a very uncommon disc. It does not pop up hardly ever. You get the alternate jacket artwork with the foreign territory poster art on the front, really nice rear jacket, and you get the same amazing sound design. It's the same 5.1 mix, and this film has a great sound mix. It sounds great on every format it's ever been released on. They can't make it sound bad. It is a fantastic film. Now that I've said that, now that I've said that, please, MGM, don't ever try to make this film sound bad, because it would kill me. This film sounds beautiful. It's definitely a film that must be viewed in a home theater environment. So once again, that brings us really full circle. Now I have technically reviewed all of the released Japanese letterboxed James Bond Laserdisc titles, from Dr. No through to The World Is Not Enough. And that's really a feat I never expected to be able to do. I always thought I would just, hear about the myths of the Japanese pressings being better or different, and just, never be able to look at any further different versions. So this has been a wonderful sort of trip through the Bond films once more, but finally looking at the amazingly packaged and long cherished Japanese versions that just seemed like another world away that I would never be able to obtain or even look at. But of course, this is not the last disc we have to go over. There's one more particular title that I certainly thought I would never come across and never be able to review, because not only is it very rare and not a US disc, but it's also significantly older, and it's also actually surprisingly letterbox, which is really stunning for the age of this disc. So we will move on from really the tail end of the Laserdisc era here with Tomorrow Never Dies to significantly earlier in actually 1984. So here we have the 1984 Herald Videogram letterbox Laserdisc release of Never Say Never Again, of course, which is the 1983 non-Eon unofficial remake of Thunderball, which was the film project that finally arose out of Kevin McClory winning the rights to the Thunderball story and the character Blofeld and the Spectre organization. Of course, this is extraordinarily early for a letterbox release on LD. Most studios didn't start doing letterboxing on titles hot and heavy really until the late 1980s, really around 1988, 1989, and into the 90s. This was still relatively early in Laserdisc. Even though LD started in the late 1970s, it really didn't take off until the mid to late 80s with the addition of digital sound and the switch over to focusing on original aspect ratios and trying to be the real cinephile home format of choice. So to find a disc from 1984 that's a foreign pressing that is subtitled in the letterboxing areas, but again is actually letterboxed is really something. There are a number of Hong Kong films and Japanese films and other foreign films that had letterboxing, but it was usually just a print scan that was already going to be letterboxed in the transfer process, and they just didn't pan and scan it. And that seems like exactly what happened here. So this is a 1983 film on a 1984 disc, so it's actually already a pretty quick turnaround for this point in home video history. And really what it appears like is that they took a release print of some sorts and simply scanned it. It's not perfect. It definitely is not the full 2:3:5 width. It really appears much more like a 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio, and in a lot of places looks almost squashed in, like they just instead of doing the anamorphic unsqueezing where you take the 2:3:5, the 2:3:5 ratio is recreated by unsqueezing the image and projection in the theater. So there are points in this transfer where it looks like they simply just didn't unsqueeze it all the way, so that way it wouldn't, they didn't have to worry about the sides of a scope film being cut off, because again, practically no one was letterboxing at this time outside of random transfers like this. So we were still talking about 4:3 CRTs back in the early to mid 80s and in Japan instead of here in the US. So yeah, it's a bizarre transfer. It's not the full 2:3:5 width, but what is amazing is the detail in the transfer is actually quite exceptional, especially for a disc from 1984. I was really stunned. I put it on not knowing what to expect quality-wise. It's not like there's a bunch of reviews out there on this disc. This disc is extremely rare. But yeah, I was really surprised, and the color timing for the most part is, again, it looks literally like they just scanned a print. They like telesended it or something, and then I don't know if they just pulled one out of a theater before it got sent back, but it looks really good, and the color timing seems to suggest some of the scans and samples I've seen from actual prints of the film, which do look significantly different in color compared to the sort of flatter video-ish look that we're used to on the primary versions, which were probably done from an interpositive or something. So if you compare this to the primary U.S. Warner Brothers Letterbox release, which was the same master that got ported for the first DVD, and then MGM struck an HD version of that, which turned up on the Blu-ray that's out of print. All those look relatively the same, and this one looks very much like a print of the film, because literally it is just a literal film print, just telesended back in the early to mid 80s, and that's it. Of course, it's got subtitling all over it, and it doesn't have a digital soundtrack, so it is analog. But it does seem to retain some of that Dolby Stereo feel, and it's definitely not as potent as the Dolby Stereo PCM on the Warner Brothers US Letterbox disc again. But it sounds pretty good for analog. It's not super noisy. So again, I was just really stunned. I put this on expecting it to look and sound absolutely horrible. And on the LDDB, it just says Letterboxd. It doesn't really go into the ratio specifics or anything. So again, I was really surprised. The cover is beautiful. They used the iconic Connery pose, where he did a number of stills for publicity, and on one of the sets in between takes. And so this was, a photo that ran in magazines around the world in 1982-83, and was even used as the poster in some territories. So that's what this looks like. This did originally come with a corner obi, a little the little triangle style one. It doesn't have it on this copy, but I was just happy to even be able to look at one of these, let alone own one, because not only is it a foreign disc, but it's a foreign disc from 1984 that's letterboxed. So I always wondered what this was like. Here's the gatefold. Again, not in color, which is common for Japanese discs, but it is in this bluish purple. So it does look pretty nice, and there's a lot of liner notes. There's some really nice stills. What I do really enjoy is they use the original promotional font for hyping Connery's return and Never Say Never Again. So this is the style font you see in the teaser trailer and the trailers for the film. And then they use some of the other poster and promotional material as well, but of course printed in blue, purple, and white. So here's the rear, which is pretty much just some general text about the film and I guess plot summary, and then a whole lot of stills, which are surprisingly in full color. So it's a pretty nice looking rear jacket. It's a little dinged up. There's some age wear definitely, but otherwise it's in perfect shape. So again, I was just amazed to be able to look at this disc, because it is exceptionally rare to find. And just to give you an idea of what the labels look like on this release, there you go. It's pretty simple, but yeah, it's just I'm amazed I was able to actually watch this, and now that I actually own a copy of this. So again, not exactly the ideal way to watch the film, because it is not full 2.35. It doesn't have digital audio, but you think film print transferred to Laserdisc in another country in 1984, analog only sound, and you think this can't possibly be any good. It does have transfer issues. The color does fluctuate. The brightness level does fluctuate, because it literally looks like a film print being transferred, So again, it's not perfect. The ratio isn't perfect. The color isn't perfect, but it's just amazing to watch. I found myself just, I would look at sections again to compare to the US one and to just, study and look at the transfer specs. But I would just get sucked into watching this transfer again because it was just amazing to look at that, somebody did a letterbox transfer in 1984 and it was a notable film. So yeah, I did just it was far better than what I expected. But of course, I went in expecting something absolutely terrible, picture and sound wise. But again, picture was very surprisingly good. Again, with reservations. So this is not the way to watch the film, from a technical standpoint, and it has issues of its own baked in, but it's just really cool to see. And again, an exceptionally rare disc. This is not something that popped up on eBay all the time. So just I was really interested to see it, and yeah, very surprised at how nice the transfer looked in spite of its inherent issues, which again it has a lot. And the jacket's pretty nice, and you get the gorgeous promo still of Sean, which is again very frameable, but also because of the age, it is sort of browning on the edges, particularly on the back. But again, such a rare disc, I never thought I would be looking at or let alone reviewing. So just an amazing way to end this review series of the Japanese letterbox titles. If you're going to talk about them, you might as well include this one too if you're able to find a copy. So this is the last disc I have to go over, and unfortunately, they never did a letterbox pressing of the 1967 Casino Royale in Japan. So the U.S. letterbox Laserdisc is the only letterbox release of that film there is. There are two pan and scan Japanese releases that I am curious to look at, simply because I've looked at practically everything else, and I love that film. So that's why there isn't a copy to go over for this video, because simply there isn't one. There isn't a Japanese letterbox release, which is surprising since they did two pan and scans, and they could have done a letterbox version, but apparently we just got the US one, and no one ever did a letterbox version over there. So that makes this letterbox copy of Never Say Never Again the one unofficial disc that I had to go over of these. So once again, in a way, it really brings me full circle to my original older video where I went over and did a review on a loaner copy of the Japanese World Is Not Enough and one or two of these discs. That really gave me a taste of what this stuff was like. So then when I got this amazing opportunity to look at all of these and then purchase all of these as a lot together, it gave me a whole new bunch of material and a whole new batch of an entire series of discs to dig through and start my comparisons all over again. So once again, we come full circle, and hopefully one day, hopefully soon, I can eventually get my own copy of the long, elusive Japanese World Is Not Enough. So that does it for this particular video. Again, a lot of discs to go over, a lot of transfer history, and a lot of comparisons to make. So again, it was kind of interesting because you hear and read about these Japanese versions for the longest time, and you never think you'll get the chance to check them out. And while they do feature gorgeous packaging, and they pretty much all feature a version of original poster art, and definitely a lot fancier than what we got here in the US, you have to keep in mind they are still, from MGMUA themselves. So they are utilizing the same masters we had here in the US. And, for the most part, it's literally a direct port of what we got here in the States. But you will have to deal with the particular not, I guess it's not quite full issues, not quite hang-ups, but there are quirks of the Japanese releases. So you have to deal with the fact that there are no chapter stops. And the big one for me is, of course, losing the CAV side threes on all the longer films that are spread across two discs. And again, it's going to be a minor thing for most people, but when you become a Laserdisc enthusiast, you really start to enjoy anytime you can use CAV or see it in action. Outside of that, it's for the most part, identical to what the U.S. releases have. I really think the only major time you can see any type of difference in terms of the picture quality is on the scope titles, because of course the letterboxing on scope films takes up a lot more of the available visual spectrum, and you're losing resolution because you're giving it away to letterboxing bars. Because these are 1993 and newer, I think on the scope films they maybe look just the slightest bit cleaner. Um, on all these, because of course they were done between 89 and 92, 93, and they have the appearance of seeming just the teensiest bit cleaner, I'm really stretching it. Like, otherwise they look almost identical, but as soon as you hit that side 3 area, you immediately notice the difference between CAV and CLV. So the US versions still have it over these in that regard. So it's sort of a mixed bag. You know, if you want to collect these, it's a very hard and usually expensive process to go through. And of course, I haven't even gotten into the Laserdisc rentals yet. I only have one of them, and they're otherwise identical to these. But I would love to get more if I ever found any for cheap. But they usually go for quite a significant amount, because it's, you know, extraordinarily difficult. Plus, the golden disc color makes them really desirable. One other difference that I found peculiar that I've seen pop up a few other times, but no one's really talked about it, is here on Unmatched Secret Service. It is the same as the U.S. version, but I wanted to save it to the end because it literally has something different in the ending. Once the film ends and we get the play out over the end credits, instead of immediately cutting to the trailer, which is included, it includes a section all on black, so the end credits fade to black with the final Bond theme fanfare. And then it reprises We Have All the Time in the World, which literally plays out over a black screen, uh, literally as if it were exit music, and tagged on as a coda. And the only thing you see there are Japanese subtitles for the lyrics, which are, you know, thankfully put in there for Japanese speaking audiences. But I wasn't expecting that at all, because I just thought it would end like the U.S. version, but it did not. And I've asked around, and some people have said they've encountered that on certain video releases. I don't know if it was ever intended, or certainly don't know if it was ever on any theatrical release version. But if anyone has ever experienced that, or knows where they saw or heard that tacked on to the end of the film, or, you know, if they ever saw that theatrically that way, please do let me know in the comments, because that was, again, something I had heard of before, and I'd encountered it somewhere before, but I'm not for sure 100% where. But again, that was really unexpected. So I've been trying to figure out ever since, you know, where did that idea sort of come from. So that's the one gigantic difference that I found in comparing all of these. And then the other thing is, I definitely thought it was strange. I thought I would have to deal with a lot of the IRE difference, which means, of course, as I said earlier in the video, that you have to adjust your brightness, because at a certain point in time, Japanese discs were mastered at different levels. So if you put in a disc with the different IRE level, it's going to be way too dark, and just you're going to think the disc is horribly wrong somehow. And you literally have to adjust your brightness and contrast levels to bring it up to what would be the correct NTSC standard for us over here. Because we're, of course, calibrated for, NTSC LD players and stuff. And so I thought a lot of these might have that, and I might have to be, have my thumb on my remote constantly to do that back and forth. But ironically, only one had it, and it was Goldeneye here. So that was the other big surprise, that I only had to adjust the IRE brightness once. But of course, as I said earlier, this and Tomorrow Never Dies are significantly noisier than the US versions, which I think are outstanding. So that was a surprise, because otherwise they're the same. And of course, Goldeneye, you lose the fantastic special features package, which is really one of the best of any Laserdisc release. So it's a real shame that they did that. But of course, if you have this Japanese release, you get the wonderful alternate artwork, and it just looks fantastic. And if you're going for Bond completion, you have to someday get into the Japanese realm. And again, I'm just amazed that I actually now have the entire run of the Letterbox series plus Never Say Never Again. So once again, the only one I am short, and the white whale that continues to haunt my Laserdisc collecting, the one disc I could never get at a decent price, is still the Japanese The World's Not Enough release, which hopefully someday I will finally find one that does not cost $350 or more. But until then, I'm very close now, because now I have completed pretty much all of the Bond titles that I wanted to get originally, which was the all the main U.S. releases, the Criterions, the Letterbox, the DTS, the box sets, and I always wanted someday to find all of the Japanese Letterbox versions to compare and have the awesome alternate artwork. So now I've finally been able to do that, and hopefully this video has been informative for all you guys. I know it's just me babbling on about this, and but again, it's information that really needs to be out there, because I read on forums for years and heard from people the Japanese versions were so much better and had the better packaging and stuff, and for the most part, it's pretty much a wash compared to the U.S. versions. They are so near identical because they share the same master. The only differences really are the one or two quirks of the Japanese versions, the lack of chapter stops, the lack of CAV side threes, so you lose that extra bit of quality on the third act climaxes of the longer films. And then also, you have of course, have to deal with the hard-coded Japanese subtitles, but it really doesn't cause much of a problem on most of the films, because you're able to mask them out because they're all confined to the letterboxing area in the bottom. So, it's also a slice of James Bond's video history, which is, really important, because the video history of films is really how we come to see and know films for the rest of their lives, outside the theatrical run. And in this day and age and the rise of streaming, it's basically the only way you're going to be able to see a film. And if the current trending towards streaming continues, the lack of quality control just goes further, and the lack of options and the lack of extras means that physical releases are going to be much more, not just valuable, but hopefully they will not be allowed to become relics of the past. But again, there's no information really out there about the Japanese versions outside of occasional mentions and things like that, and of course collectors going through what they have in their collection. But no one to my knowledge had ever really gone through all of the films and tried to make a distinct comparison. So that's what I wanted to do in this video. And again, it did take some time, but I wanted to make sure that I covered everything and tried to make it as detailed as possible, so that way you can decide for yourself if you want to start collecting the Japanese discs, or pick up a few and compare them to the other U.S. releases, or if you're in Japan, if you were curious about the U.S. releases, how they compare to the Japanese versions. So hopefully this has been very informative and entertaining, and hasn't been just me babbling on for a long time. But I just really wanted to take my time and try and get this video right, because Bond is my primary focus. Some would, well, I would just go ahead and say it's my life's obsession. So I wanted to make sure that I got as many facts that I could possibly get into this video, and really do each disc justice, and trying to compare and research any possible difference that it had. They even carry pretty much all of the same exact trailers over. There are one or two minor differences on the trailers used in terms of aspect ratio, but for all intents and purposes, the Japanese versions are literally porting the US version. So it really becomes a matter of your own personal collecting preference and what's available to you, whether or not you want to go to the expense of tracking down all the Japanese ones as well as the US ones. And of course, it also depends on what territory you find yourself in and which is more readily available to you. But these are a fantastic piece of the Bond video history, and really represent some of the best packaging the films have ever gotten, with some reservations and quirks, as every video release does. But it's also interesting to see what got pulled from some of the VHS elements that had been done for various VHS runs in terms of packaging, and how this influenced other video releases to come. So anyway, this has been a video I've been really trying to perfect before I posted it, and I just wanted to really go in depth on these, because again, no one really ever had in terms of their transfer, and these are just so wonderful to be able to pull off the shelf. They are wonderful display pieces for any Bond fan. Definitely great example of frameable Laserdisc jackets, if you're into actually displaying your LD jackets that way. And again, they just represent a part of home video history that really should be more well known and more studied. And so that's why I really wanted to cover all of these. So again, I hope this has been informative and you got something out of this. And if you're interested in the Japanese discs, I hope you're able to find all the ones you're after for not too exorbitant prices. But until next time, I will still be chasing the Japanese World Is Not Enough release, which hopefully someday I can get and do a updated review now that I've looked at all of the other 18 and Never Say Never Again, so I can hopefully one day fill that World Is Not Enough shape gap in my James Bond collection. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and keep physical media alive.